He is risen.
He is risen indeed.
Just a little quick version of our story as we became to know the Lord. John and I had similar backgrounds growing up. I grew up without a loving father in the home. We both went to Catholic school. We went to church occasionally with our parents. I mostly went with my sister, and that was because we lived across the street from a Catholic church, so we could walk. My mom would say, "You and your sister go to church," so we did. We learned at Catholic school about traditions and steps that we had to take, but we never learned about a personal relationship with God. I'll fast forward to 2001, not all that long ago it seems, it goes by so fast. I went on a trip to New York City with a friend of mine, and we shopped in the World Trade Center, which was down in the basement. If you've ever been there, you know, there's a train station, and it's really kind of an amazing place. Came back from our trip, and 2 weeks later, the World Trade Center was bombed. Well, that really shook me up. I got to start thinking, like, John and I talked about it, wow, like what would have happened to me had I been in the World Trade Center? Where would I have gone? So many questions just kind of like bubbled up inside of us. And really amazing how I thought at that time, where is God in all of this? Like, it was such a huge tragedy. Where's God in all this? So we talked about things over the course of the next few weeks, and we decided we needed to go to church. We weren't, taking our kids to church, except on Christmas and Easter. And we thought, wow, we really need to do something different for ourselves and for our children. And a really good friend of mine who I knew had become more religious, I'll say, for lack of better terms, because that was all I knew it as at the time. I said, John and I are thinking about going to church. What? We don't really want to go back to the Catholic Church. What do you think we should do? If I was her at that time, I know how I would have felt if my friend was asking me that. Joy had to bubble up inside of her with me asking this question, where should we go to church? She said, you need to go to a Bible-believing church. You need to find out what's their doctrine. Do they believe in Jesus Christ? Is the Bible what they base their teaching on? Do they teach about salvation? So I'll back up a little bit from there. And in the year 2000, I worked for the Census Bureau. And I had gone to this little church in the town of Newfane where we lived called Grace Bible Church. And when I walked in, the people were so different from anything I've ever experienced in a church. I was used to people in a uniform and just feeling inferior, I guess I would say. These people were friendly, welcoming, and I did my census, job at the time, but I remembered that when it was time to go to church. I was like, wow, that was really a different place. Let's try there. So we did. We went to church there, and it was such a unique and amazing experience. God really spoke to us through the pastor there. I had never heard someone stand up front and say that they were a sinner and that they needed saving too, just like I needed saving. They prayed with real words. It was so incredible. We had never heard anything like that.
Yeah.
John's going to tell his story, so I'll kind of skip past some of that. But at the end of the service there and the few weeks following, you know, we were given literature. People came around us. They just portrayed Jesus. It was incredible. For myself, I received some literature, which at the time, they're called tracts, but I didn't know that at the time. But I read through this literature, and repeatedly over the next several weeks, we were told, this is the message, you know, Jesus saves you. He died. He went to the cross for you because you're a sinner and because I'm a sinner. We need saving. God requires perfection. And Jesus was that perfection. And I kept reading this over and over and thinking, this is so easy. How come I've never heard this before? It was just so plain and simple. But a few weeks after, like I said, the first time we went to church, I said, I have to do this. I have to know that I'm going to go to heaven someday, and that I need saving and I need forgiveness. And that's my story, the beginning of it. That's the beginning of my story.
Well, you heard how everything else began there, and we did go to that little church, and Pastor Tom was preaching on the prodigal son that day. And I could see myself in that story, that God had given me a lot of great things, and I had given him nothing back in return. I didn't even really know if there was a God, to tell you the truth. So as the sermon was being given, I just felt a draw. I felt like God was speaking only to me in that place. And so at the end, when the gospel was given, I didn't waste any time. I gave God my life right there and then. And I'd like to say that I crawled into that church a dead man, and I walked out of there alive. In Ephesians 2, I got to put these on. It says, "And you he made alive who were dead." Two words to focus on: death and life. You he made alive who were dead in transgressors and sins, in which you used to live when you walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, the spirit who is now at work in those who are disobedient. Among all of us also walked at one time, gratifying the cravings of our sinful nature and following his desires and thoughts. And like the rest, we are by nature objects of wrath. But because of his great love for us, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ, even when we were dead in our transgressions. So that tells me I had nothing to do with it. It was all God. I walked in there and not being able to do anything. I was dead spiritually. That's one part of my life that was missing my whole life. I tried to fill it with drugs and alcohol and could never get myself complete, so to speak. And when I finally met the Savior, that changed. I became fully alive at that point. It was just a little words from a song I love. It says, "How wonderful, how glorious, my Savior's scars victorious. My chains are gone, my debt is paid, from death to life and grace to grace." So that's about it.